The year is 1991. The Gulf War rages on, engulfing the Middle East in a conflict that has captured the world's attention. Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces are dug in, facing off against a formidable US-led coalition determined to push them back. The world holds its breath, watching the events unfold on their television screens, hoping for a swift resolution but fearing the worst. Then on January 17th, sirens pierce the night in Tel Aviv, shattering the uneasy calm that had settled over the city. It is a sound not unfamiliar to the Israeli people who have lived through many conflicts, but this time, it feels different, more ominous. This time, the threat is real and immediate. Scud missiles launched from hundreds of miles away arc across the sky towards Israel. Panic grips the streets as the reality of the attack sets in. Families scramble for the safety of bomb shelters, clutching their loved ones and praying for protection. The air itself crackles with tension, every second stretching into an eternity as they wait for the all-clear signal. In those terrifying moments, as the first explosions echo in the distance, a question hangs heavy in the air. Why is Israel, a country not officially involved in the conflict, under attack? Saddam's gamble was a desperate attempt to fracture the coalition arrayed against him, a bold move to shift the balance of power. He aimed to drag Israel into the war, believing that Arab nations, facing internal pressure and public outcry, would be forced to abandon the alliance if Israel retaliated. It was a high-stakes gamble, one that could change the course of the war. And it very nearly paid off, as the world watched with bated breath, wondering what the next move would be. Saddam's back was against the wall. The situation was dire, and the stakes were incredibly high. Outnumbered, outgunned, facing the wrath of the most powerful military force on earth, he was in a precarious position. He knew his conventional options were limited, the coalition forces were closing in and time was running out. His only hope lay in driving a wedge through the fragile coalition. He needed a strategy that could disrupt the unity of his enemies. Israel, he calculated, was the key. By targeting Israel, he could potentially shift the dynamics of the conflict. The Arab world, even when united against a common enemy, was a tinderbox of competing interests. Saddam knew this well. He understood the deep-seated tensions and rivalries that existed. He gambled that by attacking Israel, he could ignite that tinderbox, forcing countries like Egypt and Syria to choose between their alliance with the US and their solidarity with the Palestinian cause. It was a high-risk move. It was a cynical ploy, a move born of desperation, but it was not entirely irrational. Saddam was playing a dangerous game, but he believed it was his best chance. The world watched with bated breath as Scud missiles, each carrying a 1-ton payload of explosive fury, rained down on Israeli cities. The tension was palpable. Was this the moment the coalition would fracture? The question loomed large over every strategic meeting and news broadcast. Would the Arab street erupt in outrage, demanding their governments break ranks with the West and stand with their Palestinian brethren? The possibility was real and terrifying. The stakes had never been higher. The world held its breath, waiting to see how this high-stakes gamble would play out. The pressure on Israel to retaliate was immense. Here they were, victims of an unprovoked attack, their citizens huddled in bomb shelters, and yet they were being asked to exercise restraint. The US, fearing the collapse of the coalition, urged restraint. The fate of the entire Gulf War now hinged on Israel's decision. Within Israel, the debate raged. Hardliners argued that a message needed to be sent. Anything less than a full-fledged retaliation would be seen as weakness. Others, however, saw the wisdom in restraint. They understood the bigger picture, the delicate balance of power that kept the coalition together. The world held its breath. Would Israel succumb to the pressure and lash out? Or would they, in a remarkable act of self-control, choose the path of restraint? The decision, when it finally came, would have repercussions far beyond the battlefields of Kuwait. Adding to the terror was the very real fear of chemical weapons. These were not just weapons of war but instruments of psychological torment. Saddam had used them before, against his own people, against Iran. The scars of those attacks were still fresh in the minds of many. There was no reason to believe he wouldn't use them again. The threat loomed large, casting a shadow over every strategic decision. The thought of those Scuds, carrying not just explosives but deadly nerve agents, chilled the hearts of Israelis everywhere. The fear was palpable, a constant undercurrent in daily life. Gas masks became a constant companion. They were a symbol of the invisible threat that could strike at any moment. Children, too young to understand the threat, were nonetheless drilled on how to use them. The innocence of youth was overshadowed by the grim reality of war. The air, once filled with the sounds of life, now carried the faint but unmistakable scent of fear. Streets that were once bustling were now eerily quiet. Every siren, every distant explosion served as a grim reminder of the invisible danger lurking overhead. The tension was unrelenting. The psychological toll was immense. The constant state of alert wore down the spirit, leaving a lasting impact on the psyche. The constant fear of a chemical attack added a whole new dimension of terror to the conflict. It was a fear that transcended the battlefield, infiltrating homes and hearts. It was a weapon that preyed on the mind, creating a pervasive sense of dread that permeated every aspect of life. The psychological warfare was as devastating as the physical. Section 5, Can't We Get Them Back? Frantic diplomatic efforts were underway. The United States, desperate to prevent Israeli retaliation, found itself in the uncomfortable position of protecting a country that had just attacked its ally. President George H.W. Bush, himself facing pressure from pro-Israel factions at home, appealed to Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir's sense of the bigger picture. The alliance, Bush argued, was hanging by a thread. If Israel retaliated, that thread would snap. The Arab world would erupt, and the fragile coalition would crumble. The consequences, not just for the Gulf War but for the entire region, would be catastrophic. Shamir, a seasoned statesman, understood the gravity of the situation. He knew that retaliation, however justified, would play right into Saddam's hands. It would be a victory for Saddam, a propaganda coup that would solidify his support in the Arab world and isolate Israel even further. Section 6. The Pressure Cooker. The pressure on Shamir was immense. His people were under attack, living in fear, and here he was, being asked by the leader of the free world to turn the other cheek. The domestic pressure was enormous. The Israeli public understandably wanted to see Saddam pay for his aggression. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for retaliation. Right-wing politicians, sensing an opportunity, lambasted Shamir for his restraint, accusing him of cowardice and of selling out Israel's security for American interests. The political temperature in Jerusalem was approaching boiling point. Shamir found himself caught between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, he had a moral obligation to protect his people, to respond to aggression with force. On the other hand, he understood that retaliation would be a strategic blunder of epic proportions. It was a decision that could determine the fate of nations. Section 7, Iron Dome, prototyped. While the diplomatic wrangling continued, concrete steps to reassure Israel and bolster its defenses. Patriot missile batteries rushed to Israel in the early days of the war, were deployed around major cities. Their mission to intercept and destroy incoming Scuds before the Patriot, though not specifically designed for ballistic missile defense, proved surprisingly effective. The sight of those missiles, streaking across the night sky to intercept and destroy a much-needed morale boost to the Israeli people. The success of the Patriot, while far from perfect, marked a turning point in the war. It demonstrated the viability of missile defense and provided a tangible commitment to Israel's security. It also bought Israel precious time, allowing them to resist the pressure to retaliate and giving diplomacy a chance to work. Section 8. The Aftermath. In the end, Israel showed remarkable restraint. They chose the path of diplomacy, difficult though it was. They swallowed their pride, endured the attacks, and trusted in the US to deal with Saddam. It was a gamble, but it paid off. The coalition held. Saddam's ploy backfired. The Arab world, instead of rallying behind him, largely condemned his attack on Israel. The war ended in a decisive victory for the US-led coalition, and Saddam was forced to withdraw from Kuwait in disgrace. The attacks on Israel, though terrifying for those who lived through them, proved to be a strategic blunder for Saddam. They failed to achieve their objective of fracturing the coalition and ultimately backfired, further isolating him on the world stage. Section 9. Echoes in the Present. The events of 1991 serve as a stark reminder of the volatile nature of the Middle East. They also highlight the enduring dilemma facing Israel, how to balance its own security concerns with the need to maintain regional stability and international support. In an age of increasing missile proliferation, the threat of such attacks remains all too real. The lessons learned from the Gulf War, both in terms of missile defense and the importance of international cooperation, are more relevant today than ever before. The ghost of Saddam's gamble still looms large, a cautionary tale of the unintended consequences of aggression and the enduring power of restraint in the face of provocation. It is a story that continues to resonate today, as the world grapples with the challenges of a new era of geopolitical